Number 10. Heads on spikes. In Sweden, workers taking down a railroad discovered something quite strange. They found remnants dating back 7,500 years inside of a swampy lake. There were piles of stones covering the skeletons of at least 10 people, along with ancient weapons made of stone and antlers. The workers also discovered the old bones of badger, deer, bears, and boar. 2 of the human skulls that were found were mounted on sharp stakes. This was a very creepy discovery, and thousands of years ago, the burial mound was likely a large pile of rocks rising above the water near an ancient settlement, covered in strange wooden structures, weapons, and the mounted remains of the most fearsome animals in the region. And of course, heads on spikes. Stockholm University's Sarah Gummison explained that this archaeological site was the first example of discovering heads mounted on stakes from the Stone Age in Sweden. But the reason these people mounted heads is a little different than what you might be thinking. Forensic analysis of the skulls showed that these people had indeed suffered wounds from battle, but they had already healed. This suggests the dead people were members of the community who fought in battles and survived them. Rather than mounting the heads of their enemies, this unknown ancient civilization probably did so with the heads of their most treasured warriors. It was more of a celebrated burial than a humiliation for their enemies. Number 9. The Creepy Mummy. Takabuti is an ancient mummy sitting in a glass case at the Ulster Museum in Belfast. She was discovered in 1835 and has been a mystery ever since. But over 150 years after she was discovered, Egyptologist Rosalind David and her team of scientists decided to finally unlock this ancient woman's secrets using CT scans and other high-tech investigative methods. What they discovered is not only creepy, but absolutely fascinating. The initial investigation revealed that Takabuti had come to a miserable end, either from an enemy attack or a betrayal. She was between 20 and 30 when killed. Her teeth were in pretty good condition, and even today, she is exceptionally well preserved. Her features are surprisingly lifelike, and her hair is still in great shape. What's really fascinating about Takabuti is that she still had all of her hair at the time of death, which was strange in ancient Egypt because most people shaved their heads to avoid lice and wore wigs instead. Takabuti was an exception, probably because she had reddish blonde hair, which would have made her quite unusual and unique to ancient Egyptians. In the end, scans revealed that Takabuti had been stabbed in the back, likely with some kind of axe weapon. Researchers believe the weapon was probably Assyrian, and that would make sense because the Assyrians had been invading Egypt at the time of her death. But because the wound was found at the back of the woman's ribs, scientists have also speculated that she may have been literally stabbed in the back, perhaps by another member of Egyptian society. Number 8. The Maya slave ship. For the first time in history, a very disturbing discovery involving the Mayans and slavery has been discovered. The ship was originally found in 2017, but it wasn't until just recently that scientists finally discovered its true purpose. The wreckage of the ship was discovered off the coast of Mexico and was a kind of paddle wheel steamboat from Cuba. It had likely been used to carry Maya people from the Americas to Cuba, where they were then sold into slavery. The ship probably functioned between 1847 and 1901 during the War of the Casques, a time when the Mayan people, still living on the Yucatan Peninsula, rebelled against their European rulers. Slavery was illegal in Mexico by this time, but that didn't stop operators from forcing indigenous Mayans into signing work contracts and then shipping them off to Cuba, where their rights would be stripped away and they'd be treated as slaves. The Mayans were sold to a middleman for about 25 pesos, then sold again in Havana for even more, with male Mayans going for 160 pesos and women going for 120 pesos. This particular slave ship was on its way to Cuba when its boiler blew up off the coast of Sicily. It sat at the bottom of the water for over 100 years. We don't know how many Maya lost their lives on the boat, as instead of being listed as passengers, they were probably listed as cargo and undocumented. Number 7. Peruvian cat claws. Some very unique artifacts were recently discovered inside of the tomb of a nobleman in Peru. Experts were digging at the archaeological site of Huaca de la Luna when they uncovered a strange set of claws, a very creepy mask, and a scepter. The artifacts probably belonged to the forgotten Moche civilization. The claws were used as part of a costume worn by participants in a Moche combat ritual, and the claws would have been part of an outfit made from animal skin. The ritual involved two men battling, the winner receiving the claws as a prize and the loser being sacrificed to the gods. According to archaeologist Santiago Uceda, the scepter would have signified power, while a pair of earrings discovered would have symbolized status. These clues suggest the nobleman buried inside the tomb was a warrior of some renown and possibly very well respected in society. He had likely won at least one combat ritual and taken the claws as his prize. As for the Moche civilization, they date back to at least 1,500 years, meaning they predate the Inca society. Their culture was centered around modern Trujillo. In 800 AD, the Moche disappeared from the history books, and nobody knows why. The society kept no written record of their exploits. Everything that we know about the Moche must be interpreted from the pottery and jewelry, weapons and armor, and other archaeological relics they left behind. What do you think about the Moche combat ritual? Is the loser being sacrificed a little harshly? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you're not subscribed to the channel, be sure to hit that button. Number 6. Railway skeletons. Railway work next to the Liverpool Street Station in London has unveiled thousands of ancient skeletons. Archaeologists began excavating the bones of at least 3,000 people buried between the 16th and 17th century, all of whom had been forgotten when the Crossrail transit line was built over the top of their graves. They probably came from the first ever insane asylum in the world, the nearby Bedlam Hospital. The archaeological dig is the biggest to happen in London in the past few decades, with all the decomposed skeletons needing to be carefully exhumed and then reburied elsewhere. They excavated wooden coffins filled with babies and found giant piles of bones and skulls. Scientists hope to find more information about how ancient people in London lived and about the bubonic plague that probably killed a lot of them. The cemetery first opened in 1569 to accommodate the overspill coming from the city's churchyard burial grounds. It was also the main burial grounds used for the Bedlam Hospital. Tests on the bones revealed that many of the people here died from one of the plague outbreaks that ravaged London on and off for about 200 years. It was also used to bury people during the Great Plague of 1665 that killed over 100,000 people. Number 5. Hitler's Wolf Lair. Before Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, he built a military headquarters in Eastern Europe for the base of his operations. These headquarters became known as the Wolf's Lair, and researchers in Poland have made some new and exciting discoveries at this very creepy piece of history. Exploration work was carried out by the Latterba Foundation from Gdańsk. Researchers discovered armored doors and a secret stairway leading down into Hitler's barracks, along with a special set of doors designed to protect the Führer from chemical attacks. Investigators even found some smaller items inside Hitler's bunker, like pipes and taps. But perhaps the most fascinating discovery was a stone with the engraving of Hitler's escort battalion. Investigators were able to determine exactly which barracks Hitler's special escort lived in. This wasn't a revolutionary discovery, but it's always pretty creepy to find anything new inside an old Nazi ruin, especially one hidden in the dark Polish forest. Number 4. The 30 Years' War. In 2011, archaeologists found a massive graveyard that contained at least 175 bodies dating back to the legendary Battle of Lutzen. This battle was between the Protestant forces of Sweden, led by King Gustav II Adolf, and a Catholic army led by Ulbricht von Wallenstein of Czech. It was one of the bloodiest battles in the 30 Years' War, with an estimated 9,000 deaths, including the King of Sweden. But what's really strange is that no bodies were ever found, even though the battle went down as recently as 1632. Archaeologists excavated a huge portion of the battlefield and found thousands of amazing relics, but they never found any human remains. Not until 2011, when they finally discovered a single mass grave left over from the battle. It's believed that the dead were removed from the battlefield by the residents of Lutzen, and then buried carefully at the sides of the road. Archaeologists now believe there are probably dozens of hidden mass graves all throughout the area, all of them still undiscovered. As for the battle itself, it was a Protestant victory. They stopped the advancing Catholics despite suffering huge losses. The place where King Gustav II Adolf got cut down was marked with a huge boulder the day after. The rock is still there in the field today. Number 3. The oldest worm. An extremely creepy creature that lived 555 million years ago has been discovered as the first ancestor on a family tree that contains just about every animal on Earth today, including humans. The ultimate ancestor is a fat purple worm and the earliest bilaterian ever. The specimen was discovered by geologists from UC Riverside. Bilaterian means an organism with a front and a back, two perfectly symmetrical sides, and an opening at each end connected by a gut. Basically, a worm. This particular worm is named Icaria wariotia, and its development was the first step in complex life on our planet. You might be wondering, what about multicellular organisms like sponges? These were definitely around first, but they aren't actually related to animals like monkeys or humans. They lack mouths and guts. The sponges of millions of years ago are very similar to the sponges of the day. It was the first bilaterian worm that pushed evolution forward. It was the first organism that was able to move, and the first organism with a gut and a rudimentary mouth. As the worm evolved, it gave organisms the opportunity to organize their bodies in different ways. Millions of years later, the creepy little worm evolved into, well, basically everything. Number 2. The impaled skull of Phineas Gage. One of the creepiest and most famous skulls in the entire world is the impaled skull of Phineas Gage. On September 13, 1848, Phineas was blasting rock in Vermont. Phineas filled a hole with blasting powder before covering it with dirt and clay and pounding everything into the hole using an old tool known as a tamping iron. It was basically an iron rod almost 4 feet or 1.2 meters long. While doing this, Phineas accidentally created a spark with the iron and the rock, exploding the ingredients he just stuffed into the hole. The giant rod then exploded into his face, shooting through his left jaw and sprouting through his cheek, narrowly missing his eye, then blowing out the backside of his brain. Phineas Gage was a little shocked by what happened. He sat down, had a bit of a think, then got up and walked to the local doctor. He was totally fine. The iron rod shot through him and went out the other side, somehow missing everything important. Phineas Gage would go on to live for 12 long years after this incident, until the age of 36. He died in 1860, at which point Harvard Medical School took his skull and put it in their museum. The skull may not have been found by any archaeological means, but it's still pretty creepy. It's sitting inside of a glass case along with the iron rod on the 5th floor of Harvard's Medical School in the Warren Anatomical Museum. Number 1. Medieval lepers. When researchers began to excavate the medieval site of the St. Mary Magdalene Hospital Cemetery in England, they were hoping to genotype a certain strain of leprosy. There's no medieval disease worse than leprosy, and researchers wanted to figure out where the disease came from and how it evolved into one of the worst epidemics in the Middle Ages. Researchers found skeletons covered in leprosy lesions. Among these skeletons was one that scientists found particularly compelling. The skeleton belonged to a young man who traveled a very far distance to die. DNA evidence showed that the pilgrim came from as far away as Africa to be treated in the earliest leprosy hospital in Western Europe, where he, of course, died. According to the same study, researchers were able to determine that the bacteria which causes leprosy has barely changed in the past few hundred years, which logically explains why the disease more or less vanished after peaking in medieval Europe. Everyone became resistant to the disease. But don't let these ancient skeletons fool you. Leprosy is still around today. Of course, the disease doesn't happen very often. It's also curable with drug therapy. Way back in 2000, the WHO declared leprosy is no longer a public health problem. This means there is less than 1 case in 10,000 people. Thanks for watching. Which of these discoveries was the creepiest? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to hit the subscribe button and come back soon for another amazing video.